From an early age, Francis Ngannou faced inhuman hardships. Life in a Cameroonian village was merciless. He had to eat from garbage cans to survive. But adversity only strengthened his spirit. At 26, Ngannou resisted the temptation to join local gangs and get involved in street fights. Instead, he decided to go to Europe and fulfill his dream to become a fighter. Francis Ngannou's happy childhood was shattered when his parents divorced. The boy was only 6 years old, but this discord put an end to the family idyll and became a true tragedy for him. From then on, Francis wandered from house to house, from village to city, from one relative to another, lost and alone. Over the years, he learned a lot about his father, Emmanuel Fosso, a man who was cruel and ruthless not only in the family circle. In his native village of Badi and far beyond, Emmanuel was known as a street fighter, capable of easily engaging in a fight with an entire gang of 4 or 5 people and beating them all up. As soon as someone asked Francis's last name, recognition immediately appeared on their faces. "Oh, you're the son of that very Emmanuel." Francis, his 4 siblings, and their mother eventually found some semblance of stability only with their grandmother. She lived in a tiny brick house with a dirt floor, literally a few steps from the smokehouse, and a separate kitchen. The number of residents in his grandmother's house was constantly changing. Sometimes there were 20 people crowded together, sometimes there were only 6, and the rest spent the night in the open air. Francis had to change schools often because he could not make friends with his classmates. As soon as the boy made a new friend, he immediately had to transfer to another educational institution. Poverty was his constant inseparable companion. He rarely came to school with food, and if his classmates tried to treat him, Francis was forced to refuse, because then they expected a return favor. It happened that the teacher wrote an assignment on the board, but Francis could not rewrite it, since he had neither a pen nor paper. Instead of sympathy, only ridicule and expulsion from the class to the laughter of his classmates. And on the days when he was not expelled, unbearable hunger forced the boy to look for food even before the end of classes. Francis measured time by the lifespan of a single pair of shoes. For 2 years he wore clumsy sneakers with thick rubber soles. It was extremely difficult to play football, the favorite village game, in them. The rubber quickly became covered with red mud, making it completely unbearable to move, as if there were weights on his feet. Because of the uncomfortable shoes, Francis played football poorly, and other children tried not to include him in the team, giving preference to their friends. "I was nobody's friend," he recalled bitterly. At the age of 9, Francis, along with his 11-year-old brother, was already forced to work in a sand quarry, receiving only $1.90 a day for hard work. The workers had to divert streams so that the water flowed down the slopes of the hills. People sat on these steep slopes, like surfers, and beat off clods of earth with iron rods, sending them down into the valley. The water carried away the mud and sand, where the boys had to manually rake the sediment into piles for subsequent loading into dump trucks by adult workers. Such hard, exhausting work was clearly beyond the strength of children. But the monotonous work allowed young Francis to distract himself and indulge in dreams. He dreamed of America after the 1994 World Cup, watching the events on TV with delight. The boy gave himself the nickname American Boy and immersed himself in this dream headlong. And in a calligraphy lesson, preparing for the transition to high school, where student cards with a signature were required, he chose the signature San Francisco Ngannou because he knew that this city was in America. Francis was convinced that nothing more was needed. His main impressions of American life were Hollywood action movies and the occasional TV show. There was only a TV in the house a couple of times as a child when his father brought the set to repair for one of the neighbors, and when Francis lived with city relatives who had a tiny portable TV the size of a paperback book. He was made to feel worthless so many times that Francis believed it. His schooling was constantly interrupted by deprivation. There was never enough money for the most basic supplies and mandatory fees. Therefore, working in the quarry, despite the inhuman labor, allowed him to somehow earn money and avoid the shame that haunted him within the walls of school. But by the age of 13, Francis had grown strong enough to do the work of a grown man. He deftly scooped up heavy red sand and, with one smooth movement, used momentum and leverage to throw it over his head into the back of a dump truck. In this way, the boy compensated for his lack of height and physical strength. His self-confidence grew, and he made a conscious decision to stop thinking of himself as a victim. What did I do wrong to deserve this? Francis asked himself more than once. And the answer was always the same: nothing. He realized that everything he owned was earned with his own sweat. The shoes on his feet, the shirt, the pants, he earned it all himself. Shovel after shovel, $1. 90 a day, day after day. He knew the value of hard work, unlike those who looked down on him. It doesn't matter if my boots are 2 years old, I know their value, Francis said. It doesn't matter if I'm wearing a torn shirt, I know its value. At 17, he dropped out of school and began preparing to leave his native village. His salary increased to $2.50 a day, and he saved every cent. Francis began boxing at a local gym, where the training conditions were more than Spartan. But the hellish work in his career only seemed to increase his muscle mass. His record grew to 6-4, but every time he voiced plans to leave Cameroon and go to America to become the world heavyweight champion, he invariably received the same mocking words: "You dream too much, bro." The years passed, and Francis remained in his home village. At 20, when his idol Mike Tyson became the heavyweight champion of the world, and Muhammad Ali repeated this achievement at 22, Ngannou turned 25. And finally, on April 3, 2012, he said goodbye to his family and set off to meet a new life. It was a journey forever imprinted in his memory: first Morocco, then a dangerous 8-mile crossing of the Strait of Gibraltar, the narrowest water border between Africa and Europe. It took Francis 3 weeks to cover the 3,000 miles to Morocco. He was helped by an underground network of ferrymen, spending his last pennies on car rides and hundreds of miles on foot. In some countries he was welcomed, in others hostile. Desert, forest, mountains, the land became an enemy to be outwitted and defeated. Wherever the sun sets, that's when you're home, Francis Ngannou concluded. In Morocco, Francis tried his best to stay in the shadows. Before entering any store, he would look out for all the available exits in case of danger. He learned to recognize police officers by their body language and clothing, wary of their indifferent looks that betrayed them as plainclothes agents. His first attempt to cross to Spain ended in fiasco when the captain of the boat, seeing the approaching Moroccan Coast Guard boat, threw down the oars and dove overboard. Francis watched with a mixture of horror and disbelief as he swam away, hoping to evade the patrol long enough to return for the others after they were arrested. But since the Coast Guard knew about the 4 passengers, they waited and captured the captain. His first 3 attempts at illegal passage failed one after another. Each time, the Moroccan police dropped Francis off in Western Sahara without food or water. Before his next adventure, he got a fake passport on the black market and became Sambam Falai, a 40-year-old construction worker from Senegal. Oh, yes, it was great to be Senegalese, he recalls with a grin. On the way through Algeria, he had already had to pretend to be a Malian. The 4th, 5th, 6th attempts, they all ended in failure. Every time the frail raft set sail from the shore, the adrenaline rush from the opportunities that were opening up overcame the fear of the boundless Strait of Gibraltar. Francis felt nothing until he was caught, and then hunger, cold, and the doom of starting all over again fell upon him. Hope, so intoxicating just a minute ago, left him like a fever. This was enough to make anyone, even such a strong-willed person as Francis, think about the correctness of the chosen path. But as soon as he imagined returning to his native village of Badi, he understood that only new humiliations and mockery awaited him there. You thought you were better than us, and now look at yourself. You abandoned everything, sold your last belongings, even your bed, and returned with nothing, admitting your defeat. Perhaps he would have to beg his brother for money and a place to sleep, listen to the ridicule of those who remained, who were drunk with gloating over yet another worthless dreamer who imagined himself above his village. Apostate, such would be his fate. Francis himself threw this word at others too often. But sometimes, on cold, rainy nights, when the only shelter in the forest was thin plastic and the only thing separating you from the damp earth was logs on rocks, the temptation to return to your old, albeit worthless, but familiar life became almost irresistible. But that would mean giving up, says Ngannou. It would mean that you no longer have hope. Francis began planning his next crossing of the Strait of Gibraltar as if preparing for a military operation. He spent hours in an internet cafe in Tangier, using the prepaid internet time left over from other visitors. Francis studied the tides, waves, currents, wind directions, and the phases of the moon. He waited for the perfect night, a wind from the south, a slight swell, a new moon. It was up to him, the captain, to set the date and time of departure. It is he who will row the hardest and most confidently. It is he who, if lucky, will be able to take the frail raft far enough out into the Mediterranean to be able to send a distress signal and call for help from the Red Cross. Then they will be taken to Spain and a new life will begin. Francis chose a night in mid-March. The wind was favorable from the south, the waves were small, the swell was weak, the moon was not visible. All members of the group chipped in and bought an inflatable raft for $50, which was to save their lives. When the time came to leave, Francis deftly avoided a skirmish with Moroccan border guards and led the group to a bay protected from the wind. He found a narrow passage between the rocks, wide enough to launch the inflated raft. 8 people climbed on board, many of them setting out on a risky journey for the first time. There was fear in the air, but everyone was filled with hope for a better life and blind faith in their muscular captain. As Francis pushed off from the shore, he glanced at his companions and tried to remain calm. They must have seen him, above all, as the embodiment of hope. He deftly pulled the raft out of the shelter of the bay and silently steered it into the night. There was nothing but water for miles around, and 200 feet below the keel. The sea remained benignly calm, the wind did not increase, and Francis allowed himself to believe that this time they would be lucky. He tried not to think about the 6 previous failed attempts, the humiliation of being arrested, the forced return, and the need to start all over again. The lights of Tangier were getting farther away. The silence between the travelers was broken only by the sound of the waves lapping against the sides of the boat and the oars cutting through the water. After what seemed like an eternity, Francis stopped the rowers and counted the distance they had covered. Then he announced to his comrades that the time had come. He saw both excitement and relief on their faces. Francis took out his phone and began dialing. Francis Ngannou arrived at a Paris boxing gym unannounced, just 10 weeks after being picked up by a Red Cross ship in the Strait of Gibraltar and the day after arriving in an unfamiliar city. He waited until the trainer working part-time at the reception desk had finished his class and then told him bluntly, "I have no money. I arrived here yesterday. All I need is a place to train because I want to be world champion." Didier Carmen took in the tall, handsome stranger with his astonishing musculature, honed by years of backbreaking labor in a sand pit. Francis's physical form was striking, but there was something else about his bearing and dignity, despite all the humiliations of his life. This was what prompted Carmen not to brush off the boy and his ambitious dream. For Francis, Paris was only a temporary stop. His path then lay in the United States, to the long-awaited glory. But he could only go on the €50 in benefits that the Spanish Agency for Migrants from Sub-Saharan Africa issued. There was no developed boxing environment in the capital of France, no real path to the championship title. Francis got to Paris by train from Madrid, using the same underground channels that Samboum Falai had used to obtain a fake passport. He found a place to stay in a covered parking lot and set up a den right on the landing. The parking lot was great, Ngannou recalls. I didn't even feel homeless. It was June 9, 2013. Francis was wearing the same sneakers that he had worn when he left Cameroon 14 months earlier, on April 3, 2012. At first, Francis avoided conversations in the gym. The MMA fighters at the Parisian MMA factory were immersed in their own subculture, seemingly knowing all the fighters and all the fights. Names rained down on him from all sides: Cain Velasquez, Junior Dos Santos, Conor McGregor. But this new world was uncharted territory for Ngannou. Afraid to expose his ignorance, he walked away from conversations, then went home and studied the fighters whose names came up, so that he would have something to add next time. And he had a shameful secret: MMA was completely unfamiliar to him, but he really liked it. The sport seemed casual, a little wild and adrenaline-fueled. Wrestling and kicking reminded Francis of those action movies that allowed him to escape the hardships of childhood. A roundhouse kick? Write it down. He treated MMA as entertainment, nothing more than a hobby for the time being while the boxing gym was closed. But then he started to succeed. Francis had been practicing the new sport for less than 4 months when his friend Lopez, also a Cameroonian, decided that he was ready to debut professionally. On November 30th, 2013, Ngannou's first fight took place against Rashid Benzine at the 100% Fight Contenders 20 tournament in Paris. Francis was nervous, excited, and embarrassed by what was happening. After all, he never intended to take this seriously, and now he was entering the professional ring with little idea of what was going on. Madness, but at the same time an exciting adventure. In the locker room before his debut, Ngannou tried to remember the rules of his new sport. What should I do? What shouldn't I do? But then he decided that he couldn't enter the cage with such doubts. This is just a fight between two people. You can handle it, he told himself. Francis won that first fight, forcing Benzine, who never entered the ring again, to surrender. Just 2 weeks later, his second fight took place at 100% Fight Contenders 21, and this time Ngannou lost by unanimous decision to Zoumana Cissé. Another turn of providence that he had learned not to question. A victory would have brought him a few euros and made MMA just another turn in his amazing life. But defeat, like any other failure, only pulled him forward to the beckoning shore. He could not leave it unfinished. On his way to his current 16-3 record, including 5 straight stoppages, Francis Ngannou knocked out 2 fighters whose names he once refused to learn in the Paris gym, Junior Dos Santos and Cain Velasquez. And to close out 2017, he also knocked out Alistair Overeem. May 9, 2020, Jacksonville, Florida, UFC 249. Jairzinho Rozenstruik became Ngannou's 18th of 19 professional opponents. As Ngannou walked from the locker room to the octagon, his coach Eric Nicksick stood behind him, watching the room and soaking up the atmosphere of the moment. He saw Francis snap his fingers, like he was going for a walk in the park, Nicksick recalls. And Rozenstruik, turning around, caught that reckless confidence and realized what a monster he was about to face. You could see it in his body language, says Nicksick, and how it all changed pretty quickly. Ngannou knocked him out in 20 seconds. His approach to training is almost surgical, staying ahead of his opponents and looking for the perfect moment to unleash a devastating right hand. According to unofficial UFC data, this punch is the most powerful ever recorded, equivalent to 93 horsepower. Francis trains in Las Vegas, at the Extreme Couture Gym under the guidance of UFC legend Randy Couture. The place is a mixed bag: tough guys from the East Coast with square jaws, thick eyebrows, and damaged ears, witty Europeans, energetic girls, and 3 burly sparring partners for Ngannou. On a surprisingly busy Saturday in mid-December, Francis was training in the main octagon of the gym, where a sign hung above the gate saying Human Resources. His body seemed to be in a constant state of flexibility, and he performed his exercises with restraint and concentration. His punches were like snake tongues, extending and contracting. The muscles in his legs bulged and contracted like snakes coiling around something. The sounds of the pads hitting the floor and the dull echoes off the walls sounded like gunshots. It's a grueling workout, I know, Nicksick says. But I think it's important to remind him every now and then, hey, you've been through a lot worse. He gets it right away, and you see that flash of, you're right, I get it. Ngannou is riding a 5-fight stoppage streak heading into UFC 270's main event against his former Paris gym partner Cyril Gane, who was trained by Lopez, the same man who gleefully welcomed one big weirdo to Paris. Lopez was Ngannou's first coach in 14 MMA fights. Their public beef has degenerated into a war of words more suited to a high school cafeteria. The drama erupted when Ngannou ignored Lopez and Gane as he walked past them in a hallway at Madison Square Garden at UFC 268 in November. Since then, the UFC has tried to paint Ngannou as an antagonist and an ungrateful fighter, calling Francis a greedy cheapskate and hinting that the champion's mother was upset that his influence was not mentioned in a TV interview. Ngannou himself believes that the promotion is deliberately making him out to be a villain to fuel the hero versus villain drama for the sake of PR. Ngannou has crossed 3 continents and overcome life-threatening circumstances to achieve his dream. And everything he has done to get to this moment defending the heavyweight title has been on his terms. Francis Ngannou's upcoming fight could be the last of his illustrious UFC career. Like many fighters before him, the Predator has fallen out with the powerful promotion as his own authority has grown. The business model, in which the UFC keeps the lion's share of revenue and athletes are considered mere employees, irritates Ngannou. Bad relationship, bro. Bad because I don't kiss their ass, Ngannou said, describing the conflict with the UFC and Dana White. The discord with the promotion has cost the champion dearly. Before his final fight in the UFC, Ngannou was $200,000 in debt to his friend Kamaru Usman. The reason was the Cameroonian's bold move. He turned down a new lucrative contract for $5 million per fight, risking being left without guaranteed earnings. I was broke, I was ruined. But I couldn't sell my soul for money, Ngannou explains. The risky bet paid off. Ngannou won his final UFC fight, then turned down another $8 million offer and became a free agent. That allowed him to sign lucrative boxing contracts with Tyson Fury and Anthony Joshua. I couldn't go against my principles and goals for an attractive but alien prospect, Ngannou says. Although boxing is exciting and lucrative, the champion can't help but admit, I miss MMA, bro. It's my comfort zone, my neighborhood. I'm in the octagon like a fish in water. Francis Ngannou lives in a 2-story house in the Las Vegas woods, among neighborhoods of faceless buildings. The pool in the yard is dry, its bowl is waiting for a fresh coat of paint. In the dining room there is an exercise bike and a treadmill, and in the cabinet next to the refrigerator there are piles of water bottles with the UFC logo. Large photo frames lean against the walls, all of them with a championship belt and a smiling title holder. From time to time, Francis throws a brand new soccer ball right, left, right to a pair of shiny sneakers. An American boy in America. In the living room hangs a single frame, a photo of Francis when he was 2 or 3, with his father, who died in 2001. Both are smiling, the boy in white shorts and a blue and gold shirt, the father in trousers and a striped shirt. They seem to be walking along a forest path, the reddish earth typical of Cameroon under their feet. Emmanuel Fosso is tall and slender, his face has the same square geometry as his son. His right foot is resting on a tree stump, and tiny Francis waves his hand at the one holding the camera. The photo is enlarged, with yellow streaks spreading from the edges, like the decay of memories. My whole life, my father has been an example of what not to do, says Ngannou. I think this is the best thing that could have happened, because if he had been different, I could have followed in his footsteps. But I still love him very much. He pauses for a moment and goes back to dribbling the football. It echoes off the high ceiling as he thinks back to the moments in the locker room last March, before he knocked out Miocic and became champion. His thoughts turn to Beatty. He thought of his mom in front of the TV, her stress levels rising. He thought of the cousins and aunts and uncles who spent time in this house with the red dirt floors, rolling their eyes at the dreamer and his wild dream. What are they thinking now? He thought, too, of the people he doesn't even know, the ones who might envy his position but dread the journey. It's not just me anymore, he thought. It's bigger than that. They all remember the original dream, heavyweight boxing champion of the world. It haunts him as much as losing his second fight, another thing left undone. He's 35, older in some ways, younger in others. Do dreams, big dreams, bro, ever expire? Ngannou returned to Cameroon last April, a month after knocking out Miocic. The champ recognized almost everyone, the kids who had rejected his dreams, the giggling classmates, the unsympathetic teachers. He returned to the mine, stood on the hillside with a tire iron, and poured huge chunks of earth into the valley below, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. He stood in the back of a truck with his family, holding the belt high above his head as the villagers danced and applauded. They felt it, they felt a part of it, he says. They said, "Oh, it's possible. You can do it." From his position in the back of the truck, Ngannou looked straight into the past he had been trying to escape and was surprised to see it looking back at him and lifting him onto its shoulders. And that day, he felt something he had rarely felt in that village, unbridled joy. For the first time in his life, after everything that had come before, it finally felt like enough. Ngannou reflected, "When I started out, I had nothing. Nothing at all. I needed everything from scratch. But when you start making money, you want to buy yourself all sorts of things, this thing, that thing, etc. But the goal is not to have more things. The real goal is to do something really important, to make your dream come true, the one you started with."